Good afternoon, everyone. Are we expecting many more people to join today? I know Archie's out. Brian won't be here because he's not feeling well. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I think that's it as far as participants we're going to get today. Before we get started, this is going to be the same link for the team leads meeting. So we'll just have to cut off 5 minutes or so I can stop the recording and then prepare for the team leads meeting. So I will turn it over to you, Emmanuel, to get us started.
All right, thank you, Prani. Good afternoon, team. Yes, today is 27th day of July 2022. This is GDUP meeting. Yeah, so we met last week and, team made a progress. So from last week, I know Winnie and Jake were able to give proposed variables for the dedupe, which we went over. If I should share my screen here, let me see if I can pull some things up. Yeah, so I know Jake and Winnie, they were going to do a deep dive on those variables to see if it's this that we're going to go with. So and some of the variables that we discussed was the CVX, vaccine date, lot number, MVX, sending facility, and we had questions, and Jake was able to explain some of the rationale behind some of the variables like the transcribed, which I think he is gonna derive into it, and Winnie also showed us some of the and the metrics, and also the reasons for some of these variables, pretty much casting across. And the questions that we had mostly was also came up was transcribed versus administered, which when we're going through the matrix and all the elements, we realize that even though it's a very important variable, but because from what we saw, that most of the systems were not reporting that as and not part of the record. So which we determined that would be difficult including it and not having any values to go with. So that was from last week. If anybody has anything that we also discussed, can also bring forward. I know today Archie is out, but before he left, he put out more or less a template that some tasks for us that if we can get accomplished, then he can start working on the dedupe code. And I wanted us to go over a little bit here. So it's pretty much a way to identify all the elements from the sources, which I know it's work in progress. I know we've had a good start on that, and we just have to maybe wait on Jake to finalize, and then we can present that And one of the main things was trying to define what is administered versus historical record. I think one of the key things that I see is looking forward to that is that. So I know we also discussed it a little bit from last week, that according to the IRA document, when you have a primary submitter, pretty much administration provider is present in the record or in the data, then it's considered administered. If it's absent, is considered historical. But I know it goes beyond that, depending on the systems and how they also report. Of course, we have, ordering provider, administration provider, and all that. And when I was following the email trail from Mr. Williams, I think for him, with regards to ASIMs, it was if the MTF code, is pretty much says transcribed, or there's some sort of transcribed variable in the MTF code, and then we consider that as also transcribed. But we have been, Major and I have been curious to see that, especially those values as it occurs in the MIP, just to see if there's a pattern that we can actually tell that when this record has these elements, then we can consider them transcribed. If they have this, then historical stuff like that. That's what we've been trying to do. But access is really, really limited right now. So, and other thing from Archie's follow-up is that we also have to go over the approved. Give me one moment here. My daughter is back here. No. So Archie wants us to discuss the progress we've made so far on with regards to the date window approval that was submitted, and that's what we want to go by today. Let's see. Give me one moment as I find it.
Okay, I want the presentation to be done by the baby. That's the sweetest voice ever.
I know. I'm trying to take it out. Okay, all good now. Yeah. So initially, we in the selection phase, we had to determine date window for the vaccinations, and we had the COVID vaccines and then the non-COVID. The non-COVID vaccines, I think we determined that it was 23 days window that we're going to go with. And also the for the COVID, for Pfizer, it was 17 and also 23 days for Moderna that we determined. So that is that. And some of the other approvals hasn't been submitted yet. So from my understanding initially that we're gonna submit everything in one shot, except if maybe anybody has any update on that as far as how we're gonna do that, but that's what we discussed prior. So, and as far as source ranking, I know I reviewed this document from Archie. He's had the different sources and also ranking them based on, and all these goes to determine, their confidence in the data source. If it's coming from Genesis or the ASIMS, then we give it a higher score, meaning we put higher confidence in them if they are administered, and if historical, then we give them a value of 3. This is from Archie. But Marjo and I haven't had a chance to look in the map to see how those records come up. But I know we brought it up a little bit, and Jake commented on with respect to MERS and MEPROS that we're going to treat them as transcribed. And as it's seen here, pretty much historical gets 3. So for MERS and MEPROS, it looks like, so when I was trying to research on MERS, it's really difficult to tell if this record was administered or historical, because it's not a specific strict rules in that where, you know, the provider fields usually in, similar to Alta, when we have provider fields, it's kind of mandatory to some extent. So when you have the provider, then you know that record was administered, but in MERS, it's nothing like that. So, and it's really difficult to tell. So when we discussed last week, and then Jake said we're going to treat them as transcribed, it kind of makes a lot of sense. But I mean, it kind of makes sense, but we will see or discuss with Archie. And I know Archie has also made that suggestion that MERS and MEPROS will be treated as transcribed, and based on the same reason, being difficult to determine if a record is administered or is considered historical. So this is not finalized, but at least we have a basis for the sources and how they should be ranked. And for today, I know Winnie is here. Winnie, did you hear anything? Or I mean, I know you're working hard with Jake on coming up with the weight. I know that's one of the. Here. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So one of the aspects that we're trying to at least come up with. I know it's been a little challenging based on the fact that we have different systems, and then some of the variables appear differently in some of the other systems. So, but if, you know, we can get maybe any update or any discoveries from as far as assigning weights to the key variables, I think that would be helpful. So I'll leave it over to you.
Yeah, hey, this is Jake. Let me see if I can remove this. Can I maybe? Okay, so I have, I guess, long story short, we don't have weights yet. We're working on getting data put together right now. But I can show you what we're working on. This works. Can you see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Sure. Yeah, so Winnie had put various data in the space for me to work with, you know, using some of these key variables that we mentioned. You know, we're going to compare, you know, CVX code, vaccine date, you know, maybe look at the number of days between, you know, one record and another, the lot number, the facility, like the location or the facility, the provider, and then also this like transcribed flag. So that was a big piece, and I think that was in Archie's, you know, document he shared. That was, he was basically saying we need to figure out like how to identify or administered versus historic record. So I'm calling historic transcribe. So I kind of came up with some logic, at least for all the sources. And I have another SQL job where I was kind of looking at the results of like the different logics or the different, you know, filters we would apply. But for Alta, it seems like the best way to identify it is with a lot number would have a TR, or, you know, start off with a TR. There's a bunch of different versions of that in Alta for lot number, but TR at the beginning kind of covered most of them. Or the provider ID is, you know, listed as transcribed. So that seemed to be a good, indicator for Alta. For dim sum, it was mostly just looking at this administered historic flag and looking for new immunization records. So as long as that was considered, as long as this was the value for this particular field, then they're considered historic, or they're considered administered records. So therefore, they're not transcribed. So they get this no, label. And otherwise, if there's anything else in this administered historic, they're considered to be historical or transcribed records. That's for dim sum. Let's see, for ASIMs, it was pretty similar logic to Alta. So lot number, basically just limiting it to be a TR at the start of the lot number, or the MTF code, like the location would be a TRAM. So if any of those appear in either one of those fields, then we treat it as a historic or transcribed record. These other sources, PDTS, TED-NI, TED-NI, or TED-NI, CPT, NDC, none of them have lot numbers, and they're all considered to be they're all considered to be administered records. So all of those are just given a no for transcribed. So they're all administered, so they're all not transcribed. And then for mods, what I was kind of playing around with for now, mods and MERS, I was actually giving it a third value, so X, so basically saying unknown, and I was playing around with that, and giving the opportunity for when we actually start making the comparisons to come up with the weights. We kind of have a third option to compare that one of them is missing this, one or more of them are missing the transcribed flag because they're from mods or MERS. So I think that kind of covers the building the data at least, or at least identifying a historic versus administered record for how I was approaching it. I don't know if you guys have questions on that, or maybe you guys have noticed something totally different from your work, or what you think.
Can you go over administered, like you mentioned, TED-NI, the sources, because they don't have lot number?
Yep, so I just said all of those were considered to be administered, TED-NI, or PDTS, TED-NI, CPT, and NDC. Those, all three of these tables were just considered to be administered. So they were not transcribed. So I basically said, no, they're not.
What makes you consider them administered? Is it because of provider ID? Okay, I see one.
I think it's just because of the way the way they're billed, right? Because these are coming in through claims, right? Maybe don't know well enough the data. Maybe I don't know, Angie or someone else would be able to speak to it more on how these records come in. But since those are claims, I think they're even though they don't have like the provider ID or lot number or anything, they were administered, or else there wouldn't be a claim submitted, right?
Okay. Makes sense.
I think that's why when Emmanuel was showing the different sources themselves, we kind of I think we treated these three sources, or maybe these PDTS, TED-NI, and ASIMs, I think were all considered to be like the best record, had the highest score for on that first column, right? It was like a 7 or something.
Yes. ASIMs was ASIMs Alta, and they ranked higher. But I know the TED-NI and NDCs, they ranked higher than the MERS and the mods.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think that's just because in order for us to even see them, they would have had to have gone through some kind of, I don't know, adjudication, or some kind of more checks, I guess, to even make it to us to say that, yes, this was an administered, you know, event.
Great. It's something that we didn't know that Ted and I or that were considered administered. I know in the CPTs, it's like procedural code, something like that. And usually in the hospitals, when the doctor performs a procedure, so I kind of understand why that would be considered administered, since it's actually something that actually happens in the clinics. But I don't know the alternative to that, you know, if maybe someone goes to, you know, let's say outside provider, and then have a procedure done, brings the record, and for some reason it doesn't have, it's missing, let's say, one of the key elements. It could be, and would that be treated as still transcribed, since we are considering all CPT or Ted and I records as transcribed?
Administered.
I think
I
it's
mean,
just the way-
administered, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's just the way it comes in. So if it comes in from Ted and I or PDTS, it had to have been administered, and maybe then they bring a slip that's, you know, their vaccination card or whatever to their commander or whatever, and they enter that into mods or whatever, and then that would be the transcribed part of it, right? But by the time this bill, this, you know, TRICARE claim comes through, it wouldn't get paid unless it was actually an administered, you know, event.
Okay,
Even though it doesn't have the provider ID, it just was, you know, done in an outside facility. It might
great.
be that you actually, you know, have let's say in that particular case, someone came to their mods, you know, facility, or I think that's where they were going to enter it into mods. They might have on their vaccination sheet, you know, the lot number and the provider ID or something on that sheet, and then that might get entered in mods with that information. But it's still the transcribed part of it. So even though it has more information in it, it still doesn't count as the administered record. The original kind of claim from PDTS would count as that.
Correct, because whoever is entering is not a person that pretty much administered, so they wouldn't claim it as their record. So I kind of guess why it would be still considered as transcribed. But the other thing is, so now considering, let's say, Ted and I, CPT, I mean NDC, CPT, all that, and classifying them as administered, are they gonna rank the same as ASIMs? I know from your this logic here, are you gonna rank it the same level or score as ASIMs, Alta, and
Oh, I see. In terms of like the weights for actually picking which is the best record, I think that we'd probably just keep the same rankings as they are.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that necessarily informs it. It's more just coming up with the assignment of was it administered or transcribed. And I think the administered is kind of like the starting point for the most part. Like these will be kind of we have high confidence in these records, at least what's in them. It's just that we know there's not going to be as much information in them because the lot number, and there's, you know, it's not going to have a location or whatever.
Correct. So I don't know, they should have a lower aggregate score compared to ASIMs and Alta.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, just because it would be incomplete, but I think you could still rank it higher than other ones, you know, mods and MERS, just because we know it's an accurate base. It just doesn't have everything in it, and then you could just fill in the rest from mods and MERS if there was more to fill
in. Great. I think this is a huge progress, because it was something that we were stuck with, trying to figure out administered versus historical without even seeing actual data,
Yeah.
and then we
And this
thank
is
you
something,
for
yeah, I'd
this.
like to, sorry, Archie's not on here too. I think I'd like to go through it with him because I've, for the most part, was working by myself on this and outside of all work you guys have done or what's already been coded for the ITR itself. So I just want to make sure that this makes sense to him too. So if Archie's going to be listening to this recording, hi Archie, let get with me. And then what else? I was then building from there. So that's basically just loading all these data, all these sources into one file. And this was all COVID-19 data, at least that we're using, but I think the same logic holds when I was building these, administered versus historic flags. That was based off of the full data that I had, not just this COVID-19 data. So, but from there,
Before,
I
oh,
guess,
sorry,
go ahead.
before you move on, I had a question up there. So I know
Mhm.
the flags that you built for the transcribe, if you go to any of them with a TR. So if it has that TR version or maybe Tran, I know some of the fields also has like unknown and like UNK. Are you
Mhm.
also considering those letters?
I haven't yet. I think that's something we can definitely look at. I, in my first pass, was looking, count wise, like what types of,
Transcribe versions you see.
yeah, what kind of versions even came in at all that weren't for like lot number, that didn't have a number in them at all. And I feel like UNK was one of them probably. I just don't think it wasn't at the top. So maybe I didn't see it as an option. But I can definitely go back and modify that if I turns out I'm missing a lot more.
And
Yeah.
also, I mean, from looking at the actual data, do you also see that maybe some fields values in the lot number like has missing values? And are you gonna also consider that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that's something I've been working with when actually now combining it all. Because for now I'm just all loading it all in, PDTS is never going to have lot number. When we actually start to combine some of these, let's see where we at. I started to compare the different, like I've set for COVID, I mean, I might need to adjust this date, but I was basically saying like right away that if two records were within 14 days of each other, then their considerations, those are the pairs that we would consider looking at. And then kind of making these different comparisons as we go. So, if the sources are equal, then they get, at the same source, variable to consider. And if they're the same source on different dates, for instance, that probably, according to the IRA document, I think that trends towards being evidence that they're distinct records, not that they're duplicates, right? Because if like one person went into Alta one day and then went in 2 days later in the same system, it seems a little different than, someone from MERS entering it in from a just transcribing what a PDTS thing was. So I kind of built all of these to be like, if it's a 1, that means it's more likely a distinct record, or it would be evidence towards a distinct record. So if there was a different date, that would indicate more likely that it's, a distinct record. And then if they have this, I kind of coded these strangely, but if the CVXs are the same, or really if they're different, then they would be, classified as different. And then that, if they had different CVX codes, for instance, then that would probably indicate it's maybe distinct records. And then, yeah, this is where I started to kind of consider blank records for locations or lot number,
Okay.
or I guess just lot number and location, where kind of forcing them to be, you know, not null and not empty is basically what this is saying. So the
Okay.
first location has to be not empty, not null, same with the second location, and then comparing them. And then I have this version, you know, basically looking if they're if they have the transcribed piece in it too, kind of ignoring those as well. So basically they have to be non-null, non-empty. They have to not be transcribed, a version of that, and then compare them, and then say if they're not equal, then we consider them at a different location. Does that make sense?
Yes, but with respect to the location variable, are you limiting it to one system or generalizing it for like all the sources?
It's for all of them, yeah.
Okay. And well, I haven't really seen the actual ones, but and are all the sources reporting like location? Do they have like I know from the matrix is there, but do they have values, you know, under
They do,
for
and
instance?
they're all slightly different, so we might need to like look at a way of trying to standardize them if we can. I don't know. They, for example, like Alta, I feel like is like a 6-digit, like, let's see.
Yeah, the Alta might be using the UIC.
Yeah.
Empty. Yeah.
Yeah, sending facility, it's like a 6-digit number, let's say. ASIMs, I think might be, yeah, it's an MTF code, so it's like a 4-digit, either MTF ID, like 4 digits, or there's also cases where it's just like 4 characters, where it's, you know, like the first 4 characters of whatever base it is. So
Okay.
as of right now, if let's say, I don't know, BAMC or whatever was in there, and I don't remember, is that 0109? I don't actually remember. Or let's say, yeah, let's say whatever BAMC's MTF code was in ASIM, which I guess maybe I'll be on. Anyways, let's say that one
0182.
Okay, let's say one of those is an MTF, but then in another record, it says like BAMC directly, but like I don't have the logic built in to say that those mean the same thing yet.
Okay, got it.
So that's something we probably need to either figure out or just kind of, for now, treat them as just different things and go from there.
And I was gonna say, Jake, is they're very, when we looked at the ITR, all the data, all the locations look very different. Some are 4 digits.
Yeah, sorry, when you're really soft, I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Way
Yes.
better.
Oh, okay. I was saying, like, when we're looking at the sending facility with Angie, they were very different across the systems.
sure.
Some were 4 characters, some was 8, 6.
Gotcha. So like there currently isn't a standardized, you know,
Right.
some standardization happening on the ITR side to handle that. That's fine. And it might just be that this location, because there's a lot of built-in, you know, you have discrepancies between each one. We don't have a lot, kind of that logic built to deal with it. We might omit that from the analysis if we need to, or just treat it as a, I don't know what word I'm looking for. Anyways, so yeah, so we can ignore it or not and deal with the repercussions of it, or, you know, the limitations of it. So so that's something we can consider. It's something I haven't looked into yet, but it's a good question. And same with provider ID. I think that's slightly different, could be different across systems. Like this is like DIMSUM is an MPI. I'm not sure exactly what Alta's provider ID is, but it might be a, you know, provider SSN, or might be a EDIPN, you know, and I don't know if we have a crosswalk set up for that yet either, for provider IDs and all of these.
No, none. And I was gonna say no logic has been built up for the even for the sending facility.
Gotcha, okay. So yeah, I think for now, we could just kind of treat them as is, and like, if we see, let's say Alta's provider ID or sending facility location that we see happens to match ASIM's, then that's like at least a good match, like that's gonna be evidence for them being duplicates at least, because it's the same information. And for now, we'll just have to deal with the limitation of, you know, not being able to perfectly match every type of ID for now. Okay, so just one more thing we're looking at. So once we have, and Winnie, I've kind of modified this, and maybe if you've been looking in Jupyter Notebook, you maybe and have loaded this in again, it might look different. I've added some more things and more considerations, but there's just a lot of comparisons between, you know, the two records. Is this 14-day restriction? Does that make sense? Or what are, I just kind of made this up, honestly. I don't know what the criteria is for COVID vaccines. Like, what should the window be?
Yeah, so it's different for Pfizer and also Moderna. For Pfizer, that would be a 17 because we took 21 days minus 4 grace period, so it came in down minimum of 17. But for
We have a
for-
table we can send to you.
yeah, there's
We'll make it easier.
yep.
Okay,
I know you brushed over it, and I know you haven't considered all that. But yeah, we have it that we can send over the date window. But it's not the same for the different vaccine types, like COVID vaccine. You might have to build 2 different logics.
sure. Yeah, or I was thinking of just applying whatever the more or less restrictive one is. If Pfizer's 1 or 17 days and Moderna's, you know, 20 days, we just set it at 20 and see how many Pfizer ones we pick up in there. But I think that it's more just for building the data that doesn't, I think that amount of days we're adding on isn't really going to change, because all I'm really looking at is there a difference in the days, not, you know, how many days different right now, you know.
Right.
So that doesn't bother matter to me what this really number is, or if we have to change it to be, you know, kind of CVX specific or whatever, that's fine too. But yeah. So once I had this particular data built, I've been playing around now with, well, we have all this data built, and we have these like two record, like a set of records that we're comparing now, a pair of records. We don't have a functional or someone to basically tell us, yes, these 2 are duplicates, or yes, these 2 are you know, distinct records. So I've been doing kind of like some clustering procedures to like basically label the data as kind of group them logically, or group them according to that algorithm, so that I'm left with 2 groups, and then we can the way we've kind of built these variables, you know, the more ones you kind of see in this data, that would lean more towards, yes, they're distinct, and the more zeros you see in here, it's going to lean towards being duplicates. So once we kind of have 2 kind of cluster centers from the clustering algorithm, we can easily kind of pick which one means that they're distinct records and which one of them means they're duplicate records. So I'm playing around with that, and I think I'm getting close to finalizing that. And then once we have that, we'll have data that is now, you know, has all these kind of key variables or comparisons between records. And then we also have a flag that says, yes, these 2 are duplicates, or yes, these 2 are distinct records. And then we can build a logistic regression model on that. And then, you know, in that, you know, the coefficients for the different variables in that logistic model could be used to kind of come up with weights for each of these key variables here. So that's what I'm trying to get to. And I think I'm getting closer, and just having the data in hand has been pretty, you know, has been the toughest thing. So it's good to, and finding the time, but I've got some good time set aside the next couple of weeks to get this, to work on this more.
Awesome, Jake and Winnie.
Oh, mostly it's Jake. Hey, Jake, I was gonna ask you, are you just picking 2 clusters, or are you trying to find like try to get the data to give you how many clusters you need, or you just decided 2?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you, by kind of forcing, because all we're really just trying to do is come up with a label, and of course
Right.
there's going to be built-in kind of error with that anyways.
Right.
But the way, like, let's say k-means clustering works, it's all, you know, based off of distance and everything.
Right.
You would end up at the end of that with 2 clusters. If, like, we set it to 2, we can set it to whatever we want. But for this, because we just need a yes,
Yes,
you know,
sir.
a distinct versus do, let's just pick 2 and come up with 2 clusters.
Okay.
So then in Python, you know, you can find whatever the cluster center is for each cluster, and then just figure out which one of those is farther away, or one of them will be closer to the origin, and like all zeros basically. So one's going to be closer to, you know, all zeros in all of these values, which would mean the one that's, you know, closer to the, would mean duplicates. And then the one that's farther away from the origin, the all zeros, closer to like all ones, if you will, that one will be, you know, the flag that's now labeled as distinct record.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What it really just comes down to is the more ones you end up having once this is built, the more likely you probably are, or the way we're going to basically just treat you as probably being a pair of distinct records then, because
Right.
yeah, if like it was a different date, same source, different lot numbers, and there's lot numbers on both of them, and they're filled in, and they're both different, you know, and they were at 2 different locations that we know are, you know, 2 locations, like that probably means they're distinct records, you know. So we're just kind of using all of that kind of intuition, I guess, or like knowledge that if all of these things are different, or all of these are ones in this data, that probably means they're distinct records. And just setting up the variables to, you know, have ones mean that and zeros mean the other option, that once we do the clustering and come up with these cluster centers, that'll kind of inform which one's which.
So for the both admin group,
Mm-hmm.
with, because it has 4 different classes, how is it gonna put are you gonna have just
Sure.
2 and
Yeah.
3 on one cluster? And
Yeah, I think what I'm actually doing instead of this one is for the clustering, I just built this as like as an optional kind of, you know, 4 different potential things.
okay, yeah.
That I would actually probably use in the logistic regression, and all I'm really going to use for the clustering is this one. Is
Okay.
basically saying, are they both for sure administered records, which basically are both of them not transcribed, as far as we just defined them earlier. So if that's the case, then they get a 1 for the clustering part. And then once we have all the labels, we can kind of open up different categories
Okay.
within that, and the same with lot, you know.
Yeah,
lot.
that makes sense. And the skewness that we are seeing, do you think it's gonna have an effect on the? It's just gonna be.
Yeah, and I think it's expected. I think that there is a lot of skewness in the way we've built it, because for the most part, if we're getting in, you know, 5 records on a certain day, I mean, it's most likely all of them are duplicates, right, from the 5 different systems or whatever. So what I've been kind of building out, I didn't show this one step of logic, which was basically all of the TED-NI NDCs and PDTS, they had like when I looked at, I wonder if this actually will just work. I would have had it before I did this delete. Basically, like they had the biggest overlap of all of the two sources, and the way we've defined them here, they have all the exact same information in them. So like if a TED NDC record comes in and a PDTS record with all of the same information, I just basically said, yeah, they're dupes right away, and just only kept the PDTS one. So there's like a little bit of filtering that went in based on the way these sources are handled, because like the way I've noticed that they were coming in, if it's in PDTS, it's very, very, very likely it's going to be in this TED NDC also. So in order to make it, to clean a lot of things up, I just basically deduped these two sources right away before even considering them as, you know, pairs, because that would just add, I don't know how many combinations if we left all of those in. And we're also just finding that in most of the other data too, you know, if one record's transcribed in ASIMS and it's also in ALTA, that most likely they're going to have zeros for a lot of these things, because except for, I mean, same source, because they're two different sources, that'll be 0. If they're on the same date, they'll have a 0. Most of the records we're getting in, the combinations or pairs we're getting, are going to be duplicates, because we just kind of expect that. Otherwise, like, we're really collecting a lot of extra data for no reason. So because we're expecting mostly dupes probably in this, it would make sense that all of these predictors in here are kind of also skewed towards the 0 end, if that makes sense, the way they're built.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And that's what I see on the other end.
One thing I have started, let me just click over to my Jupyter notebook. So what I did, let's see. So I would, yeah, basically was just looking at now these 6 data elements. So same source, date difference.
Yeah,
or
that's
different sequence, different location, different lot. and
yeah,
both master.
that's
And
what I
yeah,
did. I dropped. I'm looking exact the same that you have there.
And what I also did was, you know, just pick those 6 columns, and then I'm actually limiting it to take out all of the ones that have zeros for everything. Because those I'm basically just going to say, yeah, those are dupes, because they just have, you know, there's nothing. If every single one of these is a 0, then they're just going to be a duplicate, just because of the way
Yeah.
we've built the different flags.
That's a good point. I didn't do that.
So yeah, that you know, cut the data down from like 600,000 rows to 90,000. So still running into like memory issues here, that it needs apparently 30 gigabytes to run this, but
You know, I think they allocate like how much we can use up for the notebook, I think.
you can change that.
Oh, you can?
Is that what you're saying, or we can't change that?
No, I was saying I think they allocate how much we can run, because I've seen that happen also.
Right, and this was actually using like a hierarchical clustering thing that
Oh, yeah.
yeah, really is basically taking every pair now of records and like finding the distance between each record and then building the clusters from that, versus like picking a cluster center and then having a distance to that. So yeah, it's basically just like and if you have 90,000 rows, it's basically squaring that, and that's how many calculations are being done basically. So that's why it's now getting to be suddenly huge.
Yeah, that's huge. Would it be possible to strip the identifiers and just run it on your local machine?
Yeah, I don't have 30 gigs of memory on my on my local machine, so at least I don't think I do. No. But I mean, we can also, if we wanted to, we could even like, I was thinking about basically creating like splitting this now into 2 data sets, like a training and test set sort of thing, where the clusters are built on the training set, half of the data, let's say, or whatever it ends up being, to come up with the cluster centers, and then basically using those cluster centers as the predictor now for the other half of the data. So we would then assign the label based on the cluster center, not really from the clustering algorithm itself, but from the result of it. And then that would at least cut it in half.
Right. So
And
do 50-50
that
or
would help.
30-70?
Right. Mhm. Yeah, and then from there we would have, data to work with, and then, because I think the way it's kind of set up right now, if we were to do this clustering on this data to assign a label, and then turn around and run a logistic regression or random forest or whatever on the same data again, that just feels kind of weird. So I would want to like split it up, do the clustering on half of it, to then label the other half, and then do the prediction and stuff on that other
Yeah, that would make sense.
I don't know if that'll solve the memory issue, but it'll hopefully if we're cutting the thing in half, then we're cutting this in quarter. So maybe that will help. I don't know.
Possible.
So, but that's where I'm at right now. Trying to get that figured out.
That's a lot. You've done a lot on that.
Well, we have this conference coming up soon.
Yeah.
But I'll stop sharing. Sorry, I kind of took over the whole thing.
No, you're good. You're good, Jake. But no,
What else do
thank
we
you
need to
for
discuss,
all
or
this.
what Archie wanted us to touch on.
Yes, I believe by looking at this, he will have more questions and we'll follow up. Anybody has any inputs? You're welcome. If not, then I'll leave it over to Prani.
Okay, so if there's no one that has anything to add, I think we are good to close out here. We will not be having the team meeting today. That'll be canceled, but we'll resume on Monday. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Jake.
All right.
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Jake.
Thank you, Winnie, as well, and everyone. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.